Hey, everybody, I'm S.A. Baz Collins in for this week's Written on the Edge Season 9, Episode 37 interview. Today, we'll be talking with Timothy J. Smith and discussing his latest work. So, let's get to know our guest. From an from a young age, Timothy J. Smith developed a ceaseless wanderlust that has taken him around the world many times. En route, he has found the characters that people his works: Polish cops and Greek fishermen, mercenaries and arms dealers, children prostitutes and wannabe tourists, Indian chiefs and Indian tailors. He hung with them all in an unparalleled international career that had him smuggle band plays from behind the Iron Curtain, maneuver through occupied territories, represent the U.S. at the highest levels of foreign governments, and stow away aboard a devil's barge for a 3-day crossing from Cape Verde that landed him in an African jail. Tim brings the same energy to his writing that he brought to his distinguished career. As a result, he has won top honors for his novels, screenplays, and stage plays in numerous prestigious competitions. Fire on the Island won the gold medal for the Faulkner Wisdom competition for the novel, and his screenplay adaptation of it was named Best Indie Script by Right Movies. Another novel, The Fourth Courier, was a finalist for the Best Gay Mystery in 2020 Lambda Literary Awards. Previously, he won the Paris Prize for Fiction, now the De Groot Prize for his novel, Checkpoint, later published as A Vision of Angels. Kirkus Reviews called Cooper's Promise literary dynamite and selected as one of the best books of 2012. Tim was nominated in 2018 Pushcart Prize. His stage play tribute to Matthew Shepard, How High the Moon, won the prestigious Stanley Drama Award. His screenplays have won or placed in dozens of screenwriting competitions, including those sponsored by the Academy of Motion Picture. Tim, Jesus, what have you been doing with your life?
Sometimes I amaze myself actually when I hear all that stuff.
Well,
It's all true.
tell our listeners and viewers what started this impetus. I mean, you had a pretty wild career, from the reading of your bio. What led you to actually start to put things down on paper and start telling it in the various forms of screenplays and novels and such?
Well, I always liked writing, and I can actually say that I started my first stage play when I was approximately 8 or 9 years old, and I tried to write a novel a couple of years after that, which my mother discouraged me from doing because when she read the opening of it, she said, "This is dirty," and I didn't know what she meant by that. So I thought I better grow up a little bit so I can do the difference between dirty and not dirty. But I always enjoyed the writing parts of any job that I had, and I got to a point where I had finished a 2.5 year stint working on a U.S. government project to aid Palestinians. It was right on the heels of the Oslo Peace Accord. It There was this definite sense of that we were going to accomplish peace and all of that. And I after spending 2.5 years on the ground in Jerusalem, but with project offices throughout the Palestinian territories, I felt I had a story that had to be told. And so I just quit working to write that novel. And after I finished it, I just enjoyed the writing process so much. And I had so many other stories to tell that I just continued to do it.
Excellent. So we're here to talk about your upcoming novel, Istanbul Crossing. If you want to show people what the cover looks like so they can know what they're in for. Looks
Sure.
amazing. Great cover.
Yeah.
So if I were at a book fair and you were at a table and I walked up to you and said, "Well, what's this about?" What would you tell me?
I would tell them that it is the story of a young gay Syrian who watches his cousin be executed by Islamic State for being a homosexual, and then turns on his heels and walks to Istanbul. It took him 3 months for safety, and becomes a smuggler of people, other refugees from Turkey to Greece during this big refugee crisis that happened and peaked in 2015 to 2017. And then in the course of his doing that work, he has a good reputation for being resourceful and being honest and being easy to work with. And because of that, he's approached by both the CIA and Islamic State to help smuggle high-profile individuals between Turkey and Greece, or the other way around.
Hmm.
On part of the CIA, he is asked to smuggle journalists because they're being arrested under the Turkish government for speaking out against some issues. And Islamic State basically wants him to bring home some terrorists that have done a fairly terrible thing. Um, in the course of having to juggle these two operations, which he doesn't really want to do both operations, but he has to go along with both operations because, for instance, Islamic State also knows that he's gay, and that's a death sentence in Muslim society, or in in his world. Uh, that In the course of juggling these two operations, he meets and falls in love with two different men, and he has to make a choice between them. And they each offer very different lives, futures for him.
So where did the inspiration come for a gay Syrian as the main character? I mean, is it loosely based on your experiences of moving around in those circles, or I mean, where did that kind of ferment and grow, so to speak?
Well, this is my fifth novel, and all of my novels have had basically gay protagonists
Hmm.
or very important gay secondary characters, let's say. Most of them have been the protagonists. At that time that I started Istanbul Crossing, the Islamic State was executing young gay men by taking them up to the top of rooftops like
Right.
12 stories high or
Hmm.
14 stories high, and throwing them off to their deaths. And if they didn't die, they had been
Then,
kind enough to put a pile of stones down on the road so that the people who were watching this could stone them to death. And I thought that that was pretty powerful and really upset me. So I
yeah,
thought
no.
I needed to include that, and I wanted to do it from a young gay Syrian perspective. I have known a few gay Muslims, and I've been aware of their real struggles with family and with culture and self-identity and all of that. So it just seemed like that's how I wanted to make my main character and deal with those issues through his struggles and what he has to kind of try to do.
So I know you kind of leaked out there, and I don't know if it's too much of a spoiler, but you said that he doesn't necessarily want to do either of these things. So is it because he's gay that that's held above his head and that's what forces him to do it? Or were there other circumstances that led to his submission of actually doing these very dangerous and perilous jobs?
I'd say that basically the fact that he's gay is a big threat to him in these circumstances. The other threat is that if he doesn't actually help, he could be deported back to Syria and back to where the Islamic State is still in control. So he's got both two threats that just he could be just executed for being gay or eliminated, or he could be sent back to where he to a certain death. So he really can't do much except try to sort this out best he can.
So without giving away the ending too much, I mean, does it have a somewhat hopeful ending, or is it something that is a tragic kind of tale, or a cautionary tale kind of thing? What kind of, how would you classify this?
Well, I call this a gay coming of age literary thriller. And the main character's name is Adolf, and he's struggling with his own homosexuality for obvious reasons that it's culturally
Hmm.
not something that's done, and he knows that it's a threatening situation, and he's seen his cousin killed for this, and he and his cousin actually were having a small little affair,
Hmm.
uh, and so so it's all very confusing for him. But I would say that it ends on a very hopeful note.
Okay, excellent. I think people are in for those kinds of type of thrillers. I think they love a good page turner, but you know, you hope that, and not necessarily that it has to have a Disney happy ending, but that it should hopefully end in that the main character gets somewhere. You hopefully don't have them be in the exact same position that they were in at the beginning. You want to see some growth. So it's nice to know that, as you say, there is a hopeful note there. So that should entice people definitely to check it. Plus, I also think it's a conversation in the queer community we don't have often enough is, Islamic country, brothers and sisters and envies out there that really have a story to tell. I remember there was animation that came out that was nominated for an Academy Award called Flea, and I was just really, really moved by the tale that was told, and the fact that it's a true story, and it does have a ending that leaves you hopeful for the main protagonist in the story, no matter how many harrowing things they go through. But I think that kudos to you for actually picking up a storyline that might not be obvious to readers why you would choose something like that. But I think given your bio and your history, I can definitely see the through line. I can see where this would have appealed to you. And bravo to you for writing something that wasn't, hetero presenting, you know, gay white male, that was telling the story of what an Islamic love affair could look like. You actually put us in the Islamist uh, character who's struggling with this stuff, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I think we need a lot more of these types of stories, don't you?
Thanks. Let me just add a little bit about the background to the book and the story
Okay,
itself. Is that
sure.
my partner and I have been going to the same island in Greece for 20 years now. And it happened to be ground zero for the refugee crisis.
Mm,
So our little village of 1,500 people had 500,000 refugees arrive in a
wow.
12-month period on the beach adjacent to it. And because we're both people who have a social consciousness and want to, help where we can, we were very deeply involved with the refugees and meeting the rafts as they came ashore and help getting people off the rafts and getting them directed to where they had to go to register and helping with food. And I raised enough money to buy 16,000 hats, 20,000 rain ponchos, things like that. It was an enormous effort that we put in. And most of these refugees were Syrians when they arrived on the shores of Greece. They were fleeing the civil war in Syria, and so I felt I got to know more about Syrians, and I'd been in Syria myself a few years earlier. So that's how I really wanted to make it a Syrian story, because I I respected them so much,
Right.
what they'd gone through, and so I want to tell a story of hope and yeah, hope and caring.
I think, and I think that, part of what I don't think a lot of people understand about these refugees is the loss of their culture as well. I mean, you have this Islamist state, basically running Syria, and how many tragic, tragic cultural losses that have happened
Oh,
within the country since they've taken it over. Things that can never be replaced. Things that it's now gone. And these people are leaving all of that behind of who they are. It's literally woven in the fabric of who they are, and now they're adrift in a foreign place, having to figure out, okay, what does my life mean now? Where do I go from here? And I think that a lot of Westerners don't necessarily comprehend the fullness of that situation, which again points me to the fact that it's great that you wrote this book, because I think these kinds of stories really kind of engender compassion and empathy, hopefully, in reading them, don't you think?
I do. And in fact, this book won the Global Fiction Prize that's offered by the Leapfrog Press, and what you win if you win that prize is publication. So that's why Leapfrog Press is publishing this book, and I'm really happy to be working with them. But the final judge for that prize, basically wrote, "What happens to someone who loses everything and has to make their way in a world that's completely new?" And I think that's a very fundamental question to what this story talks about. Because
Absolutely.
making their for the Syrian refugees to make their way not only out of Syria and into Turkey, but Turkey was not a particularly welcoming place for them. I mean, they couldn't get real jobs, they couldn't get work permits. Sometimes their kids weren't allowed to go to school. They had to really work hard at just surviving and making their way in a world where they don't speak the language and share very little culturally in common except for the religion for the
Right.
most part.
And I think also that, I one of the things that infuriates me more than anything is when you have Westerners who immediately put these people on blast, thinking they're coming there to take jobs or to steal or to become criminals or what have you. And they don't realize when you're in a situation like that where you are completely removed from everything you've ever known, you are probably the most law-abiding person in
Yeah,
that community because you are fearful as F that you won't be sent back to where you fled from.
right,
And
exactly.
that keeps you on the straight and narrow more than anything else,
Right. Yep.
And I find that really infuriating. I mean, watching these refugees, yes, I think that there is a case to be made that they need, if you are being placed into a country that the situation is vastly different from what you've known, it is incumbent upon you to mold yourself or blend in with that society as much as you possibly can to create as little discomfort as you can and to eke your way into the rhythm of that society's life. But at the same time, you should not be land blasted before you even made your first decision, before you've even eaten your first meal, before the fact that you arrive on a shore in desperation and you're labeled as an unfit citizen or an unfit person to be in that country. It just really kind of blows my mind, the inhumanity that is often expressed. And I think as queer people, this might be, I'm guessing this is probably one of the reasons why you said you were so deeply involved. I think as queer people, we understand that innately
Yeah.
because in many respects, we are still strangers in our own society. And we have to deal with that. It's like a lot of people say, you, as a queer person, you come out again and again and again and again and
Yeah.
again
That's
on
right.
some level everywhere
Yeah.
around. So you're a stranger in a familiar land, and yet you have to cope with it. So I think queer people understand that plight a lot better. I'm not saying that our community is perfect in any way, but I think that having some compassion for people who are truly marginalized, we kind of get it. We really do get it. It's not
Yeah.
something that has to be explained unless you're like George Santos, and then you just are checked out, completely. But you know, uh, but I appreciate you writing this story. It sounds like an incredible work, and people love a good page turner. What's to stop them from buying it? So get out there, kids. Pre-order this thing. Anything else about the work you want to share before we move on to get to know you a bit?
I'd like to kind of follow up on what you're saying is that actually when these people landed in Greece
Mm-hmm.
or or arrived in Istanbul, they they weren't even seen as people.
Mm,
You know, I was at a community meeting in Greece where uh, to deal and talk about the refugee crisis, and within the first minute of the meeting, a matriarch of the village stood up and shouted, "Don't let them get off the boats, just shoot them." And that's pretty shocking.
yeah, that's
So,
that's that's the inhumanity that is just that, and it's all fear. It's just fear based.
yeah, it is.
They don't ever even bother to make the attempt to make a connection. It's just immediately get rid of it, And I just think, wow, to live your life like that, how fucking frightening would that be? That
You know,
everything scares the hell out of you.
yeah, I'd say though, in the case of Greece, where the refugees are landing in those vast numbers, uh, people saw them as damaging their livelihoods. Tourism was way down, that sort of stuff, and people are people who are on a margin themselves because you live in a little Greek village on a Greek island, you're
Hmm.
not wealthy.
True.
You know,
Good point.
so I I couldn't be apologetic for them, but I could understand kind of emotionally where they
Where
were
they're coming
coming
from.
from.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, you ready for our get to know you questions?
Sure.
Okay. So, in this year of diving deeper, what is your favorite snack or drink?
Oh, my favorite drink, I guess, is a glass of wine when I'm working. I, t-
Okay.
I tend to start working on new work, a new writing about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I work until midnight. So to have a couple of glasses of wine on the way, that's nice.
Gets
The
the
rest of the
juices
day I
flowing.
spent, yeah, the rest of the day I spent basically doing a lot of the mechanics and business side of writing because
Mm-hmm.
all writers have to do. You have to self-promote, you have to write blogs, you have to do stuff like that. But the real creative work, it begins for me about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, that's true. All right. Well, what books did you read growing up?
Lots of books when I was growing up. I was an avid reader, and the local school, local library in the town where I grew up had these kind of reading contests, like who could read the most books in a summer, or things like that. And I just read and read and read. And my mother was a big reader, and I knew that, and I respected her for that. She came from an even much smaller town than I grew up in, and she would say, "I read every book in our library." Well, I didn't read every book in my library in Palm Springs, California, which is where I grew up, but I read a lot, and um, I would read a variety of stuff and stuff that was much more adult than I probably should have been reading at times. I'll remember that I was often bored in school, and I would talk out of turn all the time. So, what in third grade, they just put me in the hallway and let me read every Perry Mason book that had ever been written at that point. So, that's kind of an odd thing for a third grader to be reading, but that's what I did. But yeah, I've always enjoyed good. Epic kind of stories, or I like stories that are character driven, but at the same time are kind of fast paced. I could think of James Clavell type things in Hong
Hmm.
Kong and things like that, where those are the things that kind of influenced me, I think, early on.
Excellent. Okay. Well, who's been the biggest supporter of your work?
My partner.
You dodged that bullet.
I got what?
You dodged that bullet.
Oh.
If we don't thank our partners, you know they're leaning in, going, "What?"
Yeah, my biggest supporters, gosh, I don't know. I can't name of any one or two or three. It's, the readers who really read my work and like it, and they're the biggest supporters, really. They
Yeah.
pass the word on and stuff like that.
Excellent. All right. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Well, that sort of changed when I became a writer. I used to really get up early, and I used to go to work like most people did, and I had to get up in the morning. Now I like to stay up. I was staying up and writing until about 2 or 3 in the morning for a long time, and then um, I realized I wasn't especially healthy, so I've tried to stop myself somewhere between 11 and midnight to finally decide to get ready for bed and go to bed, and then I sleep in a little bit, but then I get back to my desk and then my day starts again.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that as you get older, power naps, power naps are beautiful.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be hours and hours long, just enough that you get a nice little pick me up, energy. All
I
right.
I do that. I'll lie down for 5 minutes and not sleep, but it's enough to
Right. To
recharge my
rejuvenate. Yeah, exactly.
a little
Exactly.
bit. Yeah.
All right. Well, what's your favorite hobby outside of writing?
Well, I don't think I really have hobbies per se. I love to travel, and so I do a fair amount of traveling still. I used to have a true phobia to swimming in open water or moving water. I mean, a phobia that was a panic kind of situation for me, and I can explain why I have that in very simple terms. That when I was 18 months old, I had polio, and at the time I was put in the hospital. I was put into jacuzzi baths because that's the only way that they knew to how to stimulate the nerves in my legs, which had gone paralyzed on me. And so when I got out of the hospital at 18 months old, I was terrified of my baths. I was terrified of water. And it took me 60 years to get over that. And I finally did. And so now I swim and swim every day.
That's lovely. I like the way that turned out in the end.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. All right. Did publishing a novel change the way you see yourself?
No, it didn't change the way I saw myself. It changed the way other people saw me. And
Mm,
I'll say that, in literary circles of literary conferences and stuff, there were a couple that I would go to every year. I was just another guy slogging away, trying to get an agent, trying to get a publisher. And once I got a publisher, I had a seat at a table,
yeah.
but I didn't
Well,
have it before.
there you go. There you go. All right. Well, if you were to write a spin-off about a side character in one of your novels, who would it be?
Oh, a spinoff of one of my side characters. I don't know.
Choose amongst your children. They're all leaning in.
Yeah. I will say that I'll answer that not exactly directly, but I tend to write and in my head see things as scenes on the screen. And the reason for that partly is because growing up in my house, the television was never turned off, except when we finally went to bed. So I grew up passing through the room of the television, seeing scene. So people who read my novels see that they're very scenically driven and that they say it should be a movie, and or this character we could write, you could do more and more and more and more of this character. But I haven't done that. I haven't serialized anybody. I feel like I've told my story, and I've chosen how I approach my writing is like I mentioned earlier, I've had a social consciousness since I was very young. I wanted to help people, went into a career that helped people. And so I'll pick a topic like the refugee situation or uh human trafficking or what it was like for an average Polish family at the end of communism when the wall came down and communists fell in 1989. It's so I've told those stories. I've used those characters, and I haven't really been tempted to take them on to another into or to take a secondary character and make a new story.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just born out of we like to ask authors this question because sometimes you happen upon a character that you just think is not so consequential to the main draft of the story, but they become so likable to write about that you kind of just love when they appear in the scene. And I was that way with one of my characters. I had to keep reminding myself he's not the main character. Stop writing about him. And because he was just a loudmouth, a firecracker of a gay kid, and but he was not the main focus of the story. But so I think Vance and I we pose this question because we often find from other authors that they discover a character that didn't seem from the onset to be something that would be delightful to write about, but you kind of discover it along the way. So that's kind of where this question comes from.
Well, in terms of Istanbul Crossing, there's a character named Layla who is she runs a cafe slash bar. It's not really a bar that you can buy beer there and stuff. And it's a real place, and it's where the smugglers and the refugees would meet. And she's got a very dry sense of humor and a very strong personality. And so she is a character that I will use again, but she's in a way she's my archetypal female character because I have other female characters like her in other novels as well. So
Uh-huh.
in a way, I guess I'm writing sometimes that character that started with another book, and these characters actually visually to me are people like Irene Papas from Greece, is always in my mind, and there are a couple of other actresses
Uh-huh.
that that tend to drive my thinking about some of these characters, and I think that's another way to kind of answer your question.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, like I said, that's one of the reasons why we ask it is because it's sometimes a discovery for authors. You're writing the story about so and so, and then suddenly because this person comes along, and you're like, oh God, they're a lot of fun to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you ever traveled as research for any of your novels? Pardon my cat's tail.
I have traveled for all my novels. I had a career in international development until I finally decided to quit and become a full-time writer. All my books take place in places that I've lived for a long time, like two years or more, or they're places that I've been to many times over many years.
Mm-hmm.
Istanbul, I think I was first in Istanbul in 1973. And when I got the idea for this novel, I went back to Istanbul several times. Um, so yeah, I mean, travel has been part of my writing from the very beginning. I only have written one book and set it in a place that I hadn't really lived. I'd worked a lot in Africa, but I had not never lived there. So I didn't set it in any particular country. I fictionalized the country and the
Mm,
town because and what I really enjoyed about that ultimately was that it's a story about human trafficking. It's set in an African town, African village. There's a diamond merchants community there, which are basically Lebanese, because they run kind of the diamond business in West Africa.
right. Okay.
And I cherry picked things out of my travels and stuff. There's a very important hammam scenes in that book, and that hammam comes right out of Eastern Turkey, where I was in like 1974, things like that. So all these places, I was in that book, I was able to pick a lot of places and drop things in and really create an interesting environment. And I love doing that too. That was fun.
Excellent. Love that. All right. Well, finally, how do you celebrate when you finish a book? Or do you?
Uh, well, I think I sigh a big sigh of relief. There's usually a little champagne
The
and
sigh heard around the world.
yeah, you know,
My
yeah,
cat's photobombing me. Sorry.
it's sort of funny because it's yeah, I can see the tail. Um, you don't you finish a book and you say, okay, I'm ready, and I've edited it and all that. I'm ready to start sending it out. But they're always going to come back with more comments and things that they want reworked. So
Mm,
it takes a while to actually say, "Phew, that book's done."
yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, you made it through the list. Bravo.
Okay.
So what have you got coming up next? Are you working on anything new? Do you have any appearances or readings that you're doing you want to let people know about?
Um, the book is going to be launched here in Nice, France, which is where I live.
Mhm.
There's an English language bookstore that actually just recently opened up as an annex to the largest French bookstore in town. That launch is on September 24th. Shortly after that, right now the date is October 4th. I'll be going to the UK for a couple of weeks, and uh, hopefully we'll have author events in London, Bath, Brighton, Oxford, Cambridge, and Leeds. So that's one trip that's coming up with some events, and I'll be putting those out on social media when we have them firmed up. And then at the end of December, my partner and I are going to Tampa, Florida, where his mother lives, and to celebrate her 100th birthday, which is quite a remarkable achievement. And then I've got a short trip of some book tour spots in the US. And again, I'll put those out when we have things firmed up.
Excellent. What is with that in mind, what's the best social for people to follow you on that keep them up to date on all of these things?
Well, I'm kind of old-fashioned on Facebook. I'm not particularly keen on a lot of the other stuff. So I've got an author page as well as a personal page, and that information will go up on both. If you don't want to hear my or see my political memes, you ought to just follow me on my author page. Otherwise, you find out that I have some pretty strong political opinions. Uh,
Nothing wrong
and
with that.
yeah. Yeah, I think just Facebook is the best way
Okay.
for me. I mean, I do LinkedIn, I do Instagram, but and Instagram things will be reported out there too. But I think Facebook is
Probably
probably
the best place.
probably the best
Okay.
place.
Do you have a website or
I do have a website.
what you
It's
want to give people that domain name?
yeah, it's www.timothyjsmith, all spelled out, .com. So it's just my
Excellent.
full name, .com.
And all the links to your socials are probably on that site, right?
I all the links to my socials are all my name.
Okay, perfect.
So if it's
It's great for people to
like
know.
Instagram, it's at Timothy J. Smith. Um, when I was on Twitter, which I liked until a certain man took over,
Yeah,
I I
I
thought
think it went south for a lot of us.
it was a very useful platform, and for a writer, you could easily track down bookstores or other authors or all sorts of stuff. And I miss that. I wish Threads did as well for that. But anyway, but I'm on Threads at Timothy J Smith and Instagram at Timothy J Smith. So
Excellent. Well, everybody, we'd like to send a huge thank you to Timothy.
thank
We
you.
here at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about our artists or hearing our thoughts on the entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get alerts for new episodes. The show is produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.ropepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.